Welcome to the Canadian Beef Cattle Podcast, presented by the Beef Cattle Research Council, the most popular content from beefresearch.ca, available on the go. Before we get into today's episode, a quick message from the BCRC. Extended grazing can have considerable economic and environmental benefits over traditional winter feeding systems. Methods can include stockpiled perennial forages, annual forages, crop residues, and bales left in the field. Well-managed systems reduce or eliminate labor, harvesting, transport, and delivery of feed, and manure handling. These systems also allow nutrients to return back to the land instead of concentrating in pens. The ability to implement an extended winter grazing system, however, depends on a number of variables. Water availability, snow conditions, shelter, backup feed availability, and forage use by wildlife are all factors to consider when planning to extend grazing. To learn more, visit the extended grazing link in the show notes. This episode is titled Considerations when Using Alternative Feeds.
Hi, I'm Kristen Thompson with the Beef Cattle Research Council. Alternative or non-conventional feeds, such as grain screenings, cull potatoes, or dried distillers grains, can be an economical means for beef cattle producers to supplement forage and grain inventories while continuing to meet animal nutritional requirements. However, due to the variability in the supply, nutrient composition, and quality of these feed ingredients, there can be pitfalls if not properly managed. We are going to go over several key areas that you can focus on when deciding if alternative feeds are a good fit for your farm, which include matching the feed composition to the beef cattle groups being fed, thinking about handling and storage requirements prior to purchase, and looking at costs and whether they add up. To start off, two of the main components to creating a balanced ration for beef cattle is knowing the nutritional composition of the feeds being used and their suitability for the type or group of cattle being fed. Ration balancing tools such as CowBytes can allow you to input feed analysis results and ingredient costs in order to calculate appropriate rations that safely use alternative feeds and reduce the risk of digestive upsets. Screenings from cereals, pulses, or canola can be cost-effective sources of both protein and energy in the diet for mature cattle. However, inconsistency between loads and the potential for toxins requires feed testing to determine the true nutritional value. In comparison to screenings, byproducts of processing such as soy hulls or beet pulp typically contain a more consistent amount of energy due to having a higher level of digestible fiber, and this makes them an excellent feed source for most classes of cattle. When we look at feeds such as straw and oat hulls, they have a poor nutritional composition but can be utilized as fiber sources to partially, not fully, substitute forage and rations for mature cattle in early and mid-gestation. It is recommended to restrict the use of these feeds in the diet of bred heifers, which is a group that requires a higher plane of nutrition to meet their own growth and development needs, along with the rising demands of pregnancy. In addition, it is important to note that feeding high levels of straw can increase the risk of impaction. If feeding low to medium quality forage-based diets or grazing crop residues, additional protein supplementation is often necessary. Byproducts such as canola meal, soybean meal, or dried distillers grains are high-quality protein feeds that can be easily fed in multiple feeding scenarios and to all classes of cattle. With alternative feeds, there can be an increased risk of toxins due to the concentration of nutrients during processing or the presence of certain conditions at harvest and storage. As an example, heated or sprouted grains can have an elevated risk of molds and mycotoxins, while cereal screenings increase the danger of ergot toxicity. These contaminants can lead to reduced production performance, fertility issues, and abortions in cattle. It is recommended to avoid feeding these to bred heifers, pregnant cows, or cow-calf pairs, and to test any feeds that are suspected to be contaminated. When it comes to the handling and storage of alternative feeds, it is important to consider these before purchase. Having the proper facilities and infrastructure in place will make incorporating these feeds much easier on farm. Handling can be a challenge when working with high moisture feeds such as cull potatoes or fruit and vegetable wastes. These types of products can freeze in cold weather, making consumption by cattle difficult. As an example, whole frozen cull potatoes present a choking hazard when fed. To reduce this risk, the potatoes can be chopped using a tub grinder or crushed with equipment such as tractors. However, it is important to keep in mind that once processed, storage time is greatly reduced. In addition, high moisture products tend to ferment rapidly, especially when temperatures warm up. This creates spoilage issues, so it is recommended to feed quickly unless ensiled. Feeds such as chaff, oat hulls, or screenings can be both bulky to transport and store. Covered commodity sheds can help reduce feed losses when compared to outside storage, but these facilities need to be well maintained and functional. These feeds are also dusty and ideally fed as part of a total mixed ration or TMR with a wet ingredient or water included in the mix. When thinking of on-farm ration preparation and feed delivery, consider the mixing characteristics of the novel feed, such as particle size, shape, and density. Feeds with a fine particle size should be combined with other ingredients in a TMR to allow for the greatest utilization of that product. In contrast, larger particle feeds can be either fed on their own or mixed with other ingredients as part of a balanced ration. Now let's take a look at costs. It is key to compare feeds on an equal nutrient basis and not simply on purchase price. This allows for a direct comparison between those feeds. We're going to go over 2 scenarios to highlight this point. And an important note is that all of the nutrient values that are used in these scenarios are expressed on a dry matter basis. So for scenario 1, let's assume you have 2 protein sources that are available for purchase. Protein source number 1 contains 30% protein and costs $350 per metric ton, while source number 2 contains 38% protein and costs $375 per metric ton. So protein source 2 is both higher protein and higher cost. The cost per unit of protein for source number 1 is $1.17 per kilo. In comparison, the cost per unit of protein for source number 2 is 99 cents. Therefore, although protein source 1 is purchased at a lower price, it will end up costing more to feed the same amount of protein per head per day when compared to protein source number 2. For scenario 2, let's assume that corn grain is priced at $248 per metric ton and contains 88% total digestible nutrients, or TDN. The cost per unit of energy is 28 cents per kilo. If grain screening pellets are also available as an alternative energy source, and they are 70% TDN, the break-even price to pay for these pellets would be $195 per metric ton. In other words, in order to be paying 28 cents per kilo of energy for the grain screening pellets, you need to be paying $195 per metric ton or lower. It is important to remember that some grain screening pellets might be fortified with vitamins and minerals, which must be considered when doing these comparisons. The BCRC has an interactive calculator for evaluating the economic value of feeds that can help you determine the value of feeds that you're considering purchase and compare that to the value of standard feeds. Again, keep in mind that it is important to use dry matter values rather than as fed when running cost comparisons. Considerations when calculating the cost of transportation should include the distance hauled as well as the physical nature of the product itself. As an example, col potatoes, col onions, or other fruit and vegetable wastes can have moisture contents ranging from 70 to 90%. This means that 1 metric ton of these feeds at a dry matter of 25% or 75% moisture would contain 750 kilos of water. This greatly increases the transportation costs, especially over long distances. In addition, due to the high moisture content, bedding costs may also be increased, along with a higher risk of digestive upsets and buildup of manure tags. In conclusion, local alternative feeds can be effective and economical additions to beef cattle rations. However, careful management is required to avoid potential problems and to ensure the nutritional requirements of the cattle being fed are met.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. You can find all relevant links and information at beefresearch.ca or in the show notes. The Beef Cattle Research Council is funded by the Canadian Beef Cattle Checkoff and strives for excellence in the production of Canadian beef, cattle, and forage through research, innovation, and extension. Tune in every Tuesday as the Canadian Beef Cattle Podcast delivers straightforward insights, expert information, and a wealth of practical knowledge for Canadian beef producers. Subscribe now.